Is it all right for like a minute early?
No.
All right. All right, no worries at all. So I guess I'll start with a little setting the scene then. So it's 4:30 a.m. on a school day, and I'm woken suddenly, a 14-year-old ornery me, by the sound of dress shoes in my kitchen. And I want nothing more than to go right back to bed. It's my dad. He's getting a cup of coffee before he goes and volunteers in Louisville to count the homeless. This is an important job as the Kentucky government and nonprofit organizations can better understand where they need to allocate their resources to better help those in need. My father has done many things like this to help our community over the years. And in May of next year actually marks a decade of him working for this company, Seven County Services in Louisville, a nonprofit organization dedicating their resources to help those with mental health issues. When deciding what to do for this research conference and how best to represent Indiana University Southeast and everything, it was a no-brainer that I wanted to help my dad help our community just like he has done all these years. My name is Aidan Post.
I'm Marcy Stewart.
And I'm Lola Lynch.
And this is our presentation on Seven County Services, specifically an analysis on the effects of housing status and length of stay on revenue. And we were sponsored by Professor Saeed Tajdini, and we thank him for his help. So first, I would love to go over our agenda a little bit. So first, we're going to talk about Seven County Services, or SCS, and a little bit about who they are, what they do, and maybe where they're located in our community. Then we're going to talk about the motivation of the study, kind of like what are the motivations and the overall goal of what we're trying to achieve. The data analysis section was done using Python in Jupyter Notebook, and we'll talk more about that as well. And then finally, we're going to go over the conclusions and the overall social impact on from our data analysis.
All right, so established in 1978, this nonprofit organization aims to provide quality care and health services to individuals and families across 7 different counties in Kentucky. Like I said, they're a mental health center that offers mental and behavioral health services, substance abuse treatment, behavioral and intellectual disability services, and our primary focus today, housing, specifically addiction housing. These are 3 locations that Seven Counties has. They have 17 listed on their website, but these are 3 of the Louisville locations. So if you're driving through Kentucky and you see that sunrise, you'll know that you found them. As for our motivation for the study, SCS wanted to know if, or I guess their biggest problem is that they have clients that were staying in housing, but they also had clients that weren't. Regardless, they were paying for housing costs, but they didn't know what services were being used or paid for during the client's stay. So our goal was to find a correlation between housing and length of stay on revenue, as well as services. We wanted to know how much revenue is being generated and how the pandemic may have affected it back in 2020.
So the goal of our data analysis was to discover the impact that length of stay and housing status had on revenue. We first performed a segmentation based on a sample of Seven County Services clients using an unsupervised machine learning algorithm called K-means. We clustered the clients based on number of different services used and total services used as variables based on the theoretical argument that these variables correlate with the betterment of the client. In doing so, we found 2 distinct groups of clients and can say that clients who use a greater variety of services tend to use more services overall. This speaks to the attentiveness of clients, more so those in the housing program, and below is a screenshot of part of our analysis, and it shows the 2 clustered client groups. And beginning with service code name in unique, that is the variety of services used. So as you can see, in cluster 2, that is significantly higher. And then continuing on to length of stay, that is significantly longer for the second group, along with sum of services and revenue. So that, in looking at this table, we were able to draw the above conclusions. We then performed an analysis of variance to visualize how variables compare based on a client's housing status. In doing this, we were able to find that there were significant group differences in that clients in housing are participating in more services. This leads to greater revenue for the business, along with the theoretical argument this leads to recovery. Below is an attached screenshot of the ANOVA output, and it gives a complete view of these two groups and how the variables compare overall. So 0 is clients who are not in the housing program, and 1 is clients who are in the housing program. So if you look at the number of different services used, you can see that it again is higher with clients in housing, and at the end, revenue is higher for those in the housing program as opposed to not. And that variable directly correlates to the number of services used, so we can safely say that clients in housing are using significantly more services and taking advantage of what 7 counties offers. We then lastly performed a regression analysis, and this was to characterize the relationship between length of stay and revenue. We found a significantly positive relationship there, specifically for every 1 day increase in length of stay, business revenue grew by $6.71. We theorize this is due to the implied commitment that clients in housing possess, and that is further backed up by our previous analyses, which show that exact thing, that clients in housing are participating more in 7 county services.
As for COVID-19 and its effects on 7 county services, as you can see, there was a steady increase in revenue, and then around June of 2020, there was a drastic drop to signify the start of the pandemic and the effect of that. More specifically, from quarter 1 to quarter 2 of 2020, we observed a $178,181 decrease in earnings.
And since this analysis was conducted specifically to solve a problem that 7 county services was having, we do have some business implications that we were able to kind of conclude. So as Lola was saying earlier, the relationship between length of stay and housing, if a client were to stay longer, for example, there would be an increase in the amount of services they attend and the variety of services they attend. So one conclusion that we were able to make, in other words, was the longer one stays in housing, the more motivated they seem to be going to these different services. One extra thing that SCS could also conclude from this is that when they want to encourage for all clients to participate in their services. Not only that though, but also to specifically encourage their clients to stay in the housing as long as possible, as we did draw the conclusion that the longer that they stay, again, the more that they are going to go to different services and a different variety. One final thing I have at the bottom is a little quote. So for example, if my dad or if a representative from 7 county services went to a council meeting or went to talk to the community, someone might ask the question, why are you guys a nonprofit? Why are you talking about revenue? And in reality, this question kind of gets asked a lot. Why do nonprofits prefer revenue? And you can't have mission without margin. You can't invest in programs. 7 County Services has many ideas and many programs that they want to actually fund and that they can help the community more with. However, they do need to be efficient and they need to increase their efficiencies and overall make more margin and revenue to better help the community.
And lastly, we'll look at the social impacts. So before talking about the social impacts, it's important to note the personal impacts that untreated mental health conditions can have on a person. This can range from unnecessary disability, unemployment, homelessness, incarceration, and just an overall poor quality of life. Treating these mental health conditions is possible, as well as becoming a productive citizen through service centers like 7 County Services. Productive citizens have traits such as they're more likely to be employed, educated, make higher salaries, and vote. Further, they're less likely to commit serious crime, and all of these traits help grow the local economy and lead to a higher standard of living. And this is done specifically by productive people are more likely to create productive people, and passing down these good traits to the next generation, and society greatly benefits from this cycle.
And that concludes our presentation today. Thank you so much for having us today and all your smiles and engagement. I appreciate it. And we would also like to extend the following phone numbers on the side for you, or if anyone else has any mental health issues. 7 County Services has a wealth of knowledge and information and resources available for you. So I do extend that, and again, thank you very much for having us at the research competition. It has been our honor to represent Indiana University Southeast. If you have any questions, we would love to answer them.
Questions?
So this might be a bad question, but I'm here from the biology department, so this is a little out of my wheelhouse.
No problem.
Where does the revenue come from?
The revenue does come from their actual services. So they do have representatives like health, like mental health professionals, like therapists, group therapy, and so their actual revenue comes from either government funding, mainly government funding, I'd say, and yeah.
Okay, so is there a correlation between like the homelessness or the lack of time in housing or services and like lack of access to I'm assuming it's Medicaid or Medicare insurance, and is that keeping people from am I making myself make sense? Probably not. Is that keeping people from trying to access these services? Not.
That's a wonderful question, but it's not data that we have access to.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it could have been something that was associated with the data, but as a very confidential
Right. HIPAA.
demographic and
Yeah.
such, it's not something that we have access to, so it's not something we can answer at this time.
Yeah, I'll second that. It wasn't part of the data we were allowed to receive because it is, medical.
But thank you for your question, and
Yes.
it would be an interesting point to look into further.
Very much so.
One of the things you talked about was attentiveness. How do you measure attentiveness? How was that measured in your study?
That was measured by the number of different services they were attending, so the variety, and the number of different services and how often they were going to any services. In our study, that's the only two measures that we looked at it through.
What surprised you about your study, your findings?
Well, we went through many different iterations of our analysis as well, and so we constantly kept redoing things with many different variables. For example, we tried decision trees, and we tried to determine if you could, predict housing and many other things. And there were a lot of difficulties there, but this was kind of a eureka moment, finding that that there was a very strong relationship between people going to more services and a variety of services. I wouldn't say there were too many very big surprising factors, other than the fact that we finally did find a very solid conclusion, and we were very happy with the results. I wouldn't say that's 100% surprising because we did put our effort in. However, it was very nice to find.
So, for the number of days, is there an optimal number? I see the study seems to indicate that more is better.
Mm-hmm.
But is there some point at which we've done a lot of work with you? Are you going to be on your own for a bit? Maybe still getting some other services, but maybe not in-house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's something we kind of looked into with scatter plots in our, it's not included in this, but in our other research we looked into that. And initially there was approximately a 6 months cutoff point I think we saw, but it wasn't a very strong correlation. So based on the data we do have, there's actually only 178 housing clients for us to analyze. So we weren't able to find a strong connection between how long is the optimal amount of time versus just staying for the affordable housing. But based on just the preliminary look, 6 months seemed to be about the optimal time. And then after that, the service usage kind of fell off a bit. But that wasn't the strongest correlation.
If we had more time and data, that was actually a direct follow-up research question that we really did want to spend more time on in the future. So, thank you.
Have you asked the clients about what their plans are in terms of, hey, we've got all these services, the more time you spend here, the more you seem to be using them? Have you thought about getting more of a qualitative rather than quantitative answer to that?
Yes. So like we said, we don't know any of these clients,
Okay.
so there's no personal connection
Fair enough.
as far as to the clients, but our goal is to give this data to SCS so that they can do with that what they will, and that as you stay longer in housing, you're more likely to go to services, and hopefully that'll transition you to the road of recovery.
And as marketing majors, that was kind of the standpoint we looked at this from, is what can we tell this company that they can implement to help more people? And exactly what Marcy said, we wanted to give these business implications, and we found reasonable enough conclusions with looking at anonymous clients to give to 7 county services.
Excellent, thank you.
This may also be under the umbrella of things you weren't allowed to know. But were you able to like parse out different diagnoses? Like, was it just mental health diagnoses, or did you have like, people who are suffering from PTSD, people who are suffering from addiction, and seeing if there was any patterns that emerged with respect to this as well, or does it fall under the umbrella?
It does technically fall under the umbrella, but I will add on to that a little bit. So this is specifically addiction housing. So there are different kinds of like adult housing, people that are just struggling with resources. They have different programs, but this is a larger program, I would say, and it's also one that they're really trying to look into right now. We don't have any specific medical data, again, on their exact prognosis, but we can assume that these are people with mainly kind of addiction issues. So that's kind of what we can infer. And then also we do have a list of service codes as well, which show exactly the types of services like group therapy and such, and like AA meetings and all of those types of things. So we can assume.
This is a wonderful resource for the community.
We
Thank
agree.
you very much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.